Okay, looks like everything is up and running. Everything looks good. That means it's time to open the root beer. Ah, yes, there it is. Sugar-free root beer, of course, because when you work in IT, uh, you have to limit your sugar intake. You have to limit your caloric intake because it all becomes dangerous from the lack of physical activity. Oh my goodness. You probably hear some white noise. The machine is working to do everything that I'm asking it to do, and that's okay. But before I switch into screen share and all of that, I just wanted to start by talking about what I'm going to be doing today, where we left off last time, and things like that. So today, there is going to be there's going to be a look into the design document. Okay, so I gave a very, very, very quick glance at the design document last time, and I didn't really show anything out of it. But I sent out a poll on Twitter, and a few of you said you would like to see the design document. So I'm gonna show you that today. And the thing about it is that a design document, while it is biblical in nature, it is not the final word for whatever it is that is to be built. So I just want you to keep that in mind. I want you to keep in mind that things are subject to change based on what you see today in the design document. And so some of the things I'm going to show you are I've started adding some numbers, some things that on the simulation side of this game are really meant to kind of begin the process of balancing difficulty and things like that. And we're going to start building some of that today, maybe. But don't pay too much attention to the numbers, okay? Because the numbers are fluff at this point. Who knows what the final numbers will be? I might completely change the numbers, and balance might be completely reworked. Now, for those who are watching who are completely unfamiliar with what it is I'm going to be talking about today, the game is called Kalling Kingdom. It is a fantasy, turn-based city simulator, and it's meant to be a very small-scoped project. And what I'm hoping is that it will not take any more than about 3 or 4 months to get this entire thing done. Now, before I really get rolling into things, I'm going to go ahead and cut the face cam for just a second. We're going to switch into this nice, beautiful view of the Elega Corp website, and here I am down on the bottom right. Oh, everything is working just wonderfully. But I wanted to show you the Elega Corp website because I recently made an update, and a lot has happened this past week, okay? Not just on the website. Obviously, the Star Wars Episode 9 trailer dropped, and that was a big deal. At least it was for me. But the Elega Corp website you see this banner going on. Beautiful banner. And I don't want to sound too much like Donald Trump, but it's a beautiful banner. And, I have the t-shirts here over on the Teespring website. If you want, please go check out the merch. The merch is fantastic. Teespring does an amazing job. And then here, the other banner here, obviously, is advertising the live stream. And then down below that, there's recent blog posts, and I'll be doing some written blog posts around Kalling Kingdom as well, and then, of course, the live stream schedule. So if you ever wonder when is the next live stream, you just go to elegacorp.com, and you take a look there on the right, on the main page, and there it is, all beautifully spelled out for you. You'll also notice that on the far right, there's that word scheduled. And if there's a cancellation or anything like that, that's going to be indicated there as well. So it's important to check up on it regularly if you want to follow these streams so that you can have a clear idea of everything that's going on. So having said that, I think I'm done showing you the website for a moment here. And we're going to switch to this newer view. So I did some experimentation since the last stream. We're going to try this. This is doing window capture instead of just the normal display capture. And I have here on the left the design document, and I have on the right Unity. So we're going to start with the design document, and then as we move into things, we're going to switch over to Unity based on some of what you saw last time. And frankly, I haven't done any additional work on the code since last time. So we're gonna be working on that a bit today. Okay, so let me see here. Okay, so I'm going to start off reading the description to you. Because the alternative is that you sit there in silence and you read it, right? So I'm going to read it for you. It says the year is 4871 from origin, or FO, because in this fantasy universe, we don't have BC or anything like that. We have from origin, the origin of the world. Kalling is a fantasy world home to 5 different distinct intelligent people, all of which are formed from different origins. And by different origins, I probably mean different regions of the world. The Kalling Kingdom is a central subsection of Kalling that must be protected by the Kalling Kingdom monarchy, ruled by King Gaun Astra. Beyond the center of the known lands lie fierce, deadly monsters and perhaps other peoples. But generally speaking, exploration has not been done on a grand scale. The people of Kalling live in a careful harmony, maintaining the population of the kingdom under 2,500. And that is not by choice, that is really by necessity. But we can talk about that some other time. Within this small population of peoples, technology has begun to emerge, and so too the weapons to ward off the monsters. Expansion could be near in the years to come. Swords, metal shields, the bow and arrow, these have all made their emergence in Kalling, and so too have warriors. As the ruler of the town of Tren, it is your duty to forge a new start for Kalling Kingdom, to bring together the absolute best parts of the lands before the birth of a great expansion. The great expansion would be a much more narrative experience, but instead, this game focuses on the events before the great expansion, along with slowly producing mysteries about the past and how they pertain to the present. So before I start going into the gameplay section here, I just want to highlight that, right? Which is that the lore is I've already begun to kind of sort of flesh out possibilities for it into the future. And but for right now, the idea is that everything is being suppressed in this fantasy land. Everything is being put down to the point where this harsh environment is preventing cities and civilizations from really flourishing and prospering. And so part of your job in the game, even though this game has no combat whatsoever, is to manage these towns, to manage the town of Tren, to see the birth of this great expansion of these civilizations. So how do I imagine the gameplay working? Now, again, all of this is subject to change, including what I just read, right? But the way I imagine the gameplay kind of working is that the player controls the city of Tren within Kalling Kingdom and has a goal to create the best possible city within 60 turns while warding off threats, dealing with catastrophes that strike the kingdom and creating enough industry to prepare a great expansion. Now, just on that point, by the way, I've said that it's 60 turns. Is there any reason I've chosen 60 turns over, say, 50 turns or 100 turns? No, not really, right? So that's one of those details that is completely subject to change. But one thing I will say is that when you limit the number of turns, one of the things you have to think about is that the number of turns and the fact that you have kind of this objective within the number of turns, whatever that objective may be, because the player is choosing that objective, that turns it into a little bit more of a strategy game, not just a simulation game, right? Because I think one of the distinguishing features between a simulation and a strategy game is the existence or the presence of objectives. When you have objectives, when you have goals, when you have things you must accomplish in order to have a win or lose scenario, that's when it kind of becomes a little bit more of a strategy game as opposed to a simulation game. So you begin with 2,000K, the currency used within the kingdom. So we're not talking about dollars, we're not talking about gold coins. The cash that we are referring to in this game is this Kalling Kingdom currency. You also begin with 3 settlers of the same species and a list of available people and their attached business ventures that can be bid for through various means. People and their businesses can be incentivized through cash, resources, or tasks. And we will talk about each one of those things as I progress with development. Cash is collected through tax revenue from the town's businesses, resources are created from business output, and tasks can be performed at the expense of cash. So really, what we're talking about here is that cash is the underlying resource behind all of these, right? And part of the goal of the game is properly using your cash to make the right decisions, to produce the right resources, to make the best possible outcomes on tasks, and so on. So early game, everything is an economic challenge, really. And then as you progress onward, we will begin adding additional challenges that the player must overcome. So tasks are presented through a series of decisions throughout different turns. Through their branching structure, they impact how different people make their way into the town. To reap some of the highest benefits for Tren, the player must carefully make the right decisions to attract the best people. Cash can be spent on improvements to businesses, including ways to lower expenses, improve city infrastructure, expand trade, and warding off threats through military force. Now, that is important because while I am saying that there is no combat in the game, that doesn't mean that the military and the resources you provide the military or don't provide the military has a role to play in this game. It certainly does. And by military, we're not talking about police, right? Because this is a fantasy setting. And so we're really just talking about city-states. We're talking about military and not police as we might traditionally think of something at a city level in the real world. At the end of each game, a summary is displayed breaking down stats of the simulation, number of people in Tren, cash earned and spent, overall happiness of the people, resources owned by the town's businesses, and so on. Probably many other things will be shown in the end of game summary to let you know how you did and what you might want to do the next time you play through. So with that, I'm going to talk about some things you may need to think about within each individual turn. So within each individual turn, as the player advances to the next turn, each business generates a certain amount of income. Income for each business is influenced by trade agreements with other towns, the current state of the world market, and that is very important. We might even work on that today, by the way, the state of the world market. I'll talk more about that later. The number of people working for the business, which can affect the prosperity of the business. When times are good, more people is good. I might have that increase the income of the business, but when times are bad, then that might be a risk to the player and to the business. The business type, of course, which I showed a little bit about the business types last time, and I'll be talking about that as I go through the design document here. But basically, we have a very small number of types, and we're going to expand that outward as we progress, hopefully. Or, who knows, I may keep the scope very, very small. And then, of course, seasons, right? So such as in the case of farms during winter versus summer. But, you know, seasons and weather and the climate, that overall sort of thing. Natural disasters is another. You know what? I'm going to put that in here as well. I'm going to say natural disasters because I want that to be in the game as well. You might have earthquakes, you might have monster attacks, you might have all kinds of things going on. With the cash collected from income, the player can opt to look to a list of other people from other towns in Kalling Kingdom to see who is looking for work, or if they already have work, they may be looking for different work, and that is a parallel to the real world. Now, under tax rate, I did mention last time that I probably want the player to be able to manipulate the tax rate and to have that be a fairly significant part of the game, because I think it would just be fascinating and interesting to apply kind of some economic rules around that based on whatever the other conditions are that are going on within the game. And we'll talk more about that later as well, but this is a high-level overview, hopefully. So the world market fluctuates up and down and may have some degree of randomized events that affect the fluctuation. And that, of course, means the market can crash in the event of disasters, occasionally spike in the event of magical miracles, and be slightly dampened or enhanced by the current season. Generally, fall and spring will provide a slight boost to the normal fluctuation, while winter and summer will put a slight dampener on the economic state of the world market. Now this is going to be very difficult to read. Ooh, yes it is. So for this purpose, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to temporarily switch, I think, to display capture, just so that it'll be easier to see this. I did not think about this before I started. I'm so sorry about that, but let me see what I can do to get a better view here. Because we are going to want to look at these tables. These tables are very important, even though they may have numbers that may be entirely subject to change. So here we are. We're going to switch to the full display view here for a moment. And I believe I want the distraction-free mode. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, it's still not quite as I want it. Oh, it's kind of ugly. Oh, goodness. Okay, well, we're going to just have to make do. That's okay. The general idea is that, so I talked about the different business types last time. So basically you can have a restaurant, you can have weapon makers, there's hotels, there's farms, and this is a typo. That should say stable. I'm going to save the file there. Below are the currently proposed starting attributes of businesses for each game. So one of the things I showed in the last session is that businesses start with a default income per turn. And that income, I think, was 5. And then I did an experiment while I was kind of prototyping, and I said, well, what if we have it fluctuate between 3 and 7? And really, what actually has to happen is that the income of the business has to respond to the environment of the simulation. So basically what I've done here is I've broken out some ideas into this table. And I know it looks like it's an ugly table, but you get the general idea if you just look at the headers here. So there's the business type, which is really just the name of the kind of business it is. There's the number of these types that are allowed per game. So in other words, the idea being that you can have up to 4 restaurants, you can have up to 2 weapon makers, you can have up to 2 hotels, you can have up to 10 farms, and you can have up to a couple stables. You have a default income per turn, which means that these businesses will by default be giving you this much revenue, right? Now that's a problem when we think about taxation rate. So as I press onward here, really thinking about this, there's probably going to have to be a difference. If I want the tax rate to be manipulated, then mechanically what I have to do is I really have to break out what is the total income of the business with the total amount that is paid out in taxes. So something to think about there. And you know, just for the simulation's purpose, I may want to do that anyway. But even if we have it, you know, a tax rate that stays perfectly still at something like 10%, for example. 10% is a fantastically low tax rate, by the way. I just want to say that. If you are paying 10% in taxes in the real world, you're paying pennies on the dollar for taxes. But I digress. So yeah, so you have the default income per turn. You have the total possible before modifiers. Now, what this means is that when I say modifiers, I mean things like the state of the world market, I mean seasons, I mean natural disasters, I mean monster attacks, I mean any kind of number of things that could potentially happen that could manipulate how well the business does. And we're going to continue to build those out as a part of the simulation as we press forward. But that's what I believe this number is supposed to be. So if you think about it, what did I say here? And I believe this is actually a total for a single worker as well. So don't pay too much attention to that. There's also the maximum number of workers. So you start each one of these business types, you would start with a single worker, and then of course there's additional workers that may end up working in that business. And there's the default buyout price. And the default buyout price is very, very important, I think. And I'm hoping that once I test it out, I will continue to think that's the case. Basically, the idea is that if you look to another town and there's another business, and there's a single person running that business, all these numbers are kind of, originally when I was typing these out, I was like, well, right now in the prototype, there's one person to one business. There's not multiple workers within a business, and therefore, since there's one person, one business, I might say, well, okay, the business is going to generate X amount, etc. But really, when we're talking about buyout price, as you can imagine, just like the housing market or something in the real world, things can affect the price of the business buyout. So again, just don't pay too much attention to these numbers, because just about all of these numbers are going to be subject to some kind of modifier within the game. And that's a part of the complexity of the simulation, right? But if you can imagine, so if you look to another town, you might be able to buy a restaurant outright for 5,000 in cash, 10,000 to buy a weapons maker, 3,500 to buy a hotel, etc. And when I'm talking about the number of workers affecting the income, I'm talking about these potential multipliers against whatever the normal amount is. So I've already begun to kind of type out a rough idea of what that might be. And so as you can imagine, what you have to do is you have to really weigh all of these factors. You have to say, in the short run, it might look attractive to have everything coming out of a weapons maker. But is that really the best route early game? What about starting off by creating a ton of farms? Would farms result in the town being more vulnerable if I only have farms, as opposed to having a weapons maker? So these are the kinds of decisions, as you can kind of start imagining, that I want the player to really think about as they go about managing this town. But on the flip side of this, the beautiful part about all of this is that we're looking at a very small number of business types. We're looking at a very limited number of decisions, but as you begin to multiply out the number of possibilities across these different attributes, across the different modifiers, it begins to become a very complex game, even though the foundation, the number of sort of components that we're beginning with, are very small. And so I'm hoping that this all kind of works out for really nice, deep gameplay as we begin to build all this out. So let's talk about expenses. What are some things that you're going to have to spend money on every turn to run this town? Because running a city is not free, and you can't just begin collecting businesses with no overhead. So I've kind of defined these things out where you're going to have to spend money on a military. You're going to have to spend money on infrastructure, water, waste, administration. I may add additional things as we go, and of course, with the additional things, I may or may not be manipulating these numbers. But it gives you a general idea that, okay, to run the town, I'm really going to have to think about what's going out versus what's coming in. And when times are great, do I need to think about developing some kind of a surplus? Because I may need the savings as time goes on. I may need to worry about debt on the city. I may need to worry about all these kinds of economic questions as time goes on. And of course, we have the species. So I did some sort of background lore about the different peoples of Kalling Kingdom. And, honestly, a lot of these are kind of cloned a little mechanically out of The Legend of Zelda. Please don't sue me, Nintendo. But you know what? This is, again, very subject to change, because this is really just to give me a starting point. And for those who are completely unaware, if you're on the Elega Corp Discord server, which, by the way, you should be, but if you're not, you might have been aware that a lot of the inspiration of this game really came from a combination of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, particularly the Terrytown fetch quest, where you're building out kind of this little town, and you have to go and find all these different people from across the kingdom. Spoiler alert, sorry if that spoiled it for anyone who hasn't gotten to that point in the game, but that is the source of inspiration. And then in addition to that, I would say another big point of inspiration was Democracy 3 from Positech Games, or Cliff Harris, if you know who that is. If you've never played Democracy 3, it doesn't matter. It's a political simulation game where you basically manipulate a number of political policies, as someone who is kind of manipulating not manipulating. I mean, you are manipulating, but not in a general way that people like to think of. But you're basically running the government in that game. You get to kind of control everything for the most part. And as you change policies, those have different outcomes on the society that you are taking care of, right? But in this game, even though there's some inspiration there from Democracy 3, I'm really inspired by the turn-based simulation aspect. I'm not creating a bunch of political policies in this game in the same sort of way. And of course, the other thing is that I think Democracy 3 is really meant to be a little bit sort of based on the real world in a lot of ways, and it's supposed to, at least from the standpoint of Cliff Harris' opinion, it's supposed to reflect reality as he kind of sees it, I think. And of course, I have no such agenda with this game because I am acknowledging here that this is 100% completely and totally fantasy. And so just bear that in mind. And of course, if part of my inspiration is from Zelda, then absolutely that would be the case. Now, I'm going to go into the code because we left off last time talking about the code and showing some of the code, and I was working on the code. So we're going to go back to that this game. Now, I've done something a little bit different over here in Unity because what I have here in Unity is I have the current turn, the cache, the people. Last time I had this on more of a full screen display, and I'm going to save the scene in the project here. And it worked out pretty well, but the thing is now our view is a little more condensed here on the stream with window capture. So what I've done is I've temporarily moved in to the center the current turn and the people readouts there here in the UI. And this is a prototyped UI. But one of the things I have to worry about for sure is that this really needs to be able to adapt to a number of other resolutions, and I have not gotten there yet at all. We are still extremely early, okay? So where did I leave off? I left off in the game manager, and I'll let you kind of go back and watch that first stream if you really want to know everything that happened last time. But in general, I'm going to kind of move forward with a fresh slate here to talk about what we're doing today. So what are we doing today? Well, based on the design document, we have a number of things that we could think about today, but I want to be very focused. So let's run the game a little bit and let's kind of see where we are on the game. Let me turn down the desktop audio just a tiny bit more. And I'll hit play here in Unity. Okay. So yeah, we have some music that plays, and by the way, this music is not, it's not the soundtrack. This is music that is royalty-free music that was pulled out of the YouTube Creators Library, and it's really not meant to be part of the soundtrack for real, unless everyone really loves it, in which case, hey, it's royalty free, maybe I might just keep it in there. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, this is bothering me. I have to move over that people display because that's going to drive me crazy. Let me alter that just a tiny bit. It's a little too squished there close to the cache display. There we are. Okay. So yeah, so once again, like when I run this, there's a few things that I can do. I can acquire people automatically by just hitting the P key on the keyboard, which is obviously, that's not how the mechanic actually is meant to work. We're meant to entice these people. There's a whole process, there's a whole part of the game that has to be built out around that. But then I can advance to the next turn by hitting the N key right now. And based on the number of people, there's basically, under the hood, there's businesses that are going along with these people, and I'm beginning to collect cash as I advance through the turns. Now, this is very, very simple. There's no expenses yet. We need expenses to happen, right? And there's the number of people that impact the income. The more people, the more income. There's a maximum of 20 people right now. Very, very, very simple. And I can get all the way to the end, but I'm not going to do that. But as you can see, it kind of works, okay? By the way, if at any point there's anything troublesome about the the audio or how well you're able to see things and stuff like that, let me know. I'm completely aware though that there's, especially here in the Unity editor, some of these tiny things down here, like in the code and the resources and the console logs and stuff like that, that's probably going to be pretty difficult for you to see, especially because we're scaling down from 1080p to 720p. But if there's anything I can work on to make it a little bit better, you just let me know in the chat, and I'll get right on it. Okay. All right. So let me switch over back to the design doc. So obviously there's some very important things that we need to get sorted out here. Okay. So right now, the way the game literally works here in the code is that for every person that is added, a business comes along with them. So I need to think through, and this is where now we're going to be I haven't prepared for any of this, right? This is you're going to be working with me as you watch. But we're basically going to step through and decide how we're going to implement this here in this prototype. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to say, you know what, we might have a business with one person and we may want to add additional people to that business. So the first thing I really need to do is I just need to make it possible for that to happen, okay? So how does that get implemented? Well, if we go and we look at the implementation of the business here in the code, it's extremely simple. So this object, this class here called business, this represents what a business is in the game. It's tied to a type. And if I really wanted to, I could modify this to say this is not a farm, it's a stable, right? Or it is a hotel, okay? But by default, all businesses start as farms. Don't worry about that too much. That's really just a programming type thing for the purposes of initialization. We have to have a type if nothing else gets assigned. It's an object-oriented programming thing, okay? And the business itself has its own cache. So that's interesting too, because some of that cache is meant to be coming out of, we're meant to have some of the income per turn coming out of the cache of the business, or to go into the cache of the business, right? So really there's a few things we need to think about. Yeah. If we go and we look at the person, oh my goodness, ignore that metadata file. That's all non-readable human for human stuff. But if we go and look at the person, people actually have first and last names. They have their own cache. They have their happiness level, and they are assigned to a business. Very, very interesting. So here's what I'm going to do, I think. And this is a tiny bit of a circular reference at first, but I think you'll find as I press into it that it's going to make a lot more sense, which is I'm going to tie this back to a person, and they are going to be the owner, I think. And this is going to get initialized at null. In other words, nothing. Nobody owns the business yet, okay? So with that in mind, we did a few things that were kind of shortcuts last time, okay? So one of the things we did is the game gets initialized with these people. It gets initialized with this randomized business function. And we say we're going to create a new business for every new person, and we are going to assign the person to the business. We're going to add the business to owned business. Now this is just for the first 3 people, okay? But we do other stuff to initialize things out of the game. So if we go and we look at this, okay, test create randomized business. This is in fact creating a brand new business for every person that we're adding. Randomized income is between 3 and 10. That I want to change right away as well, right? Randomized income is integer, and we end up based on whatever range this is, because this is a floating point number, and then we convert it to an integer, okay? And then it ends up being the income for every turn on that business, okay? So it could be very high, it could be very low. It could be between 3 and 7 when I say high and low. So all of this has to change. All right, this worked for kind of a little bit of kind of getting us started, but this is going to have to change completely. So how do we go about changing this? I honestly I don't immediately know. But so one thing I was thinking is that you have an owner for every business, and since you have an owner for every business, it means that that owner could effectively impact the direction of the business. And as you have additional workers get added to the business, you might have a person who's assigned to that business, but they are not also the owner, right? Makes sense, because that's how it works. You have someone running the business, and then you probably have stuff like employees. Or at the very least, I'm just going to say that's how it works in this game, all right? I don't know what other kind of crazy ideas you might have about how it ought to work, but for right now, that's what we're doing. Okay. So, person may be assigned to be the owner. It's interesting. Okay. So how does a person end up getting added to an existing business? Gosh, great question. Great question. I think for this to make any kind of sense, we have to talk about the mechanic of choosing people. Because when we try to entice someone to the town, we have to do it some limited number of ways. We're basically either offering to do something for them, we're offering them stuff or resources, or we're offering them flat out cash. Okay. At least that's what we're doing for now. Okay. So I think to really get this to make sense, then we have to really begin thinking about what are the person's wants, what are their needs, how do they go about making a decision themselves, and that's a little bit of an AI-driven thing, right? So we have to think about that. So their happiness begins at 50, and it could go down very, very low. Could go down to 0, right? What would negative look like? They just start going postal? That's probably only funny to me. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say there is a status. There's a status of someone's usually going to begin at available, I think. Oh my goodness, that's probably supposed to be in double quotes. Available, okay. And they could be available, or they could be in town. I think that makes sense because they're either out there, and when you think about it, I mean, this is an interesting question, but it's like, what are all the states that a person could be in this game? And I think that in the back of my mind, the way I'm always thinking about it is that if a person's available, it basically means they exist. If they're not available, they're either in your town or they don't exist. For mechanically speaking, okay? Because all that really matters to the player is whether they are available or whether they're in your town, period. Otherwise, the rest of the simulation is kind of performing the illusion that there's this big grander world out there. And I think that's how I'm going to begin the process here of the simulation. Okay, so they're either available or in town. They always start at available. And how are they going to decide if they're going to move to your town? And for this, I think it would just be useful to define some wants or some needs. Maybe I should actually break it up into that bit. So maybe I might say, oh, this is interesting. How about I do this? How about I say there's a comfortable level of cash, and when they're below that cash, they want money. Oh, I like that. I like that. That's very sim-like too, isn't it? And it's going to be different per person. So maybe I say comfortable at cash. And maybe I'll say 50. Comfortable at cash. And of course, this is an int. Comfortable at cash, 50. And when they're below 50, then they want something new. They want to get out. They want something better. Okay. Comfortable at cash. So I'm gonna say we're gonna start getting a lot more advanced with how we create people now. I think is probably what I'll do. So I'm gonna create a function for this, and I'm gonna say initialize available person, and I'll have it return a person as well. So initialize available person, and there's going to be a person, new person. This is going to be some kind of a range, I think. So I'm going to say int comfortable at cash will be somewhere between, oh goodness, I don't know. Where's my range function? Where's my beautiful range function? It's up here somewhere. Here it is, Unity engine.random. I'll just use this guy. There's a part where if I get a community around this game, people will be like, oh, I hate RNG, man. RNG doesn't involve skill. It's like rolling dice. Yeah, well, some of this is rolling dice. It's a simulation. Some of it's randomized. Okay, so comfortable cash, probably somewhere between 40 and 80. We'll just start with that. It's just, I mean, the numbers basically don't matter right now while we're prototyping. This is all going to become way more important later. Oh yeah, and I'm going to say system dot, oh goodness, the text is so much larger than last time. System.convert.to int32, and I want this to be yeah, I want this to be this whole thing. There we go. Because these could end up with a huge, decimal behind them, and in fact they probably do, but we really want to always have that be an integer, because the currency doesn't have cents, it doesn't have pennies, it doesn't have increments between the units. You either have 1 or you have 2 or you have nothing in between. Because why not? Okay, so 40 and 80. These people up here at 80, they're just really snooty. I'm telling you, they're snobs. Okay, so and of course, that also should have an impact on what you're able to offer them as well, right? They may continue to be available, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to offer them something that they're going to be happy with. Oh man, I like this already. Okay, so then the person comfortable at cash will be our comfortable at cash value, and we want to probably randomize some other stuff. So eventually I'm going to have some kind of a first name and a last name generator. One thing I haven't talked about, by the way, since I'm talking about giving people names, I want the player to get really attached to the people. I want them to really begin to care about what these people are after. And, that's tricky to do with some of this randomization stuff or this procedurally generated stuff. But I'm hoping that the emotional impact on players will be that they care about the people that they're leading, generally speaking. Unless they like the idea of being evil in the game, in which case I'm sure I will give them plenty of opportunity to do that. Just naturally speaking. Okay, so first name, last name. I still have to assign something over here in the game manager. So for right now, I will just stick with something weird and crazy. So I'm just gonna say person, first name is person, and their last name will be something else totally random. String, is it string? Oh, it's toString. Oh, it's Unity engine dot random dot range. And I'm going to do a really giant range. I'll just say, hopefully I don't break anything by doing this. Never a good idea, honestly, to have giant numbers like this that could either overflow or overlap through chance, but you know, I'm going to do it anyways. ToString. Let me make sure I'm doing that correctly. So I need to do a find ToString because I did this somewhere else. Current person. Yeah, so that's an int to a string, right? Yep. Okay, so that's good. Add person to city. Fun stuff. So really what I'm doing is I'm going to decide how do the available people kind of get generated at a more in-depth level here. Advance income from businesses. Test random. I have lost my place. Where was I? Oh. Initialize available person. Okay. First name, last name. Cash. We got to give them some cash. And it has to be above whatever they're comfortable with. No, it has to be below. Well, right now it has to be below. We don't have to do this way later, but we have to do it this way right now, I think, because right now this is the only mechanic we have. So we're really just going to start with cash, I think. You know? Yep. So I'm going to say this is going to be the comfortable with cash value minus comfortable with cash. So this is going to be system.convert to int32, and this is going to be minus a percentage. I'm going to say, gosh, there's a lot of number manipulation going on here, isn't there? We're going to subtract comfortable at cash times point, I'll just say 15%. It's a floating point number. Oh goodness, is it going to let me do this because these are ints? I hope so. Probably not, but we're going to find out. It's not even, what am I doing here? This is not even colored correctly. That's probably a bad sign. I'm probably screwing up the syntax. What did I do? Okay, so int, comfortable at cash minus blah, blah, blah. It looks right. Oh, no, what? This is outside the brackets. No wonder it was all colored all strange and weird. Scott, pay attention to what you're doing, Scott. Okay, so there we go. Okay, now we're doing good. We're gonna return the person. We gotta return the person before we forget. Person.cash, person.hat. We can leave the happiness and max happiness where they are. Why not? Something else to think about manipulating later. Initialize available person. So now we can really begin to change this up down here when we talked about initialize city people. Because this does a combination of providing whoever is currently there in the game, as well as as a part of the town, as well as deciding who's available. This function does it all. Initialize city people. Okay, so Oh goodness. Sorry, I'm trying to manage Windows and do this at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this out. And right now, okay, I'm gonna take the first and last name out. And so instead of just saying new person, we're gonna use our new function, which is initialize available person. The singleton that provides the available person. Da, 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 da. Okay, so I think that's far enough for me to begin running this in Unity now. That's probably far enough. Okay. And I hit play, and it fails. No, it works. It fails. It works. Okay. Business.cache is printing out. Oh, I see exactly what's going on here. So, oh yeah. Yeah. Okay, so there's multiple businesses, and there's like this call that's being made to printing out the business.cache. That was something I did a while ago. So it looks like I did separate this out a while back for taxes versus the business amount of money. Business and the owned business. Business.cache is income per turn. So the income per turn is going to... Oh yeah, I did do it. I don't know why I had it in my mind before that I didn't do that before. But you are getting cash from the businesses. You are taxing the businesses. Oh gosh, that's great. I didn't even realize I was that far ahead. Okay, so very interesting. So okay, so let's see. So an interesting thing that I can do now is that as the turns progress, people who were available before may not be available later based on how comfortable they are. Because however well they're doing wherever it is they are, you know, they may decide, well, I don't want to move to Tren ever. Things are gravy. Why would I ever go? It's really fascinating how like each tiny little thing you add just opens up these giant possibilities. It's multiplicative with all of this. So, yeah. And I really need to think about what is the interaction between the amount of cash that a person has versus the amount of cash that a business has. How much is being taxed? How much of an individual's cash goes to expenses of their own, maybe? You know, why does that matter? And right now, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. I mean, I don't know. Because something has to change this in order for it to matter. So really what this points to is that there's this interaction between business and person, right? And this comfortable cash idea is really only going to mean something if the cash that the person has goes up or down. And in order for that to matter, it matters what their own personal income and expenses is. Okay. By the way, I see some folks in the chat. How are all of you doing? Hopefully you're enjoying what you're seeing here. I'm just getting lost in it, you know? I'm just getting lost. Okay. Let's see. Well, to accomplish what I was hopefully setting out to do today, I think I'm going to circle back to this idea of personal income and expenses. I really want to stay focused on how does a business acquire additional workers. That's really one of the first things I want to solve, because it affects a huge bit of the simulation. I think an easier place to attack first, though, before I finish all that out, I'm going to come back to everything I was doing. I want to add global expenses every turn. These are just going to be flat expenses, so I can start getting a rough idea of how the simulation is doing for the player. So I'm going to go back to my handy dandy design document and go to my terrible looking markdown table of expenses per turn. And for this, I do think it would make sense to go ahead and create a new script, a new C# file. And I will call this expense. Expense. Yeah, it can have mono behavior. Well, does it need mono behavior? No, not really. In fact, I probably don't even need the Unity engine thing in here at all. Can take that out. Does not need that. Okay. Expense. So this doesn't need it either. We don't need mono behavior. But I am going to say there is. Oh, I guess it can be a type. I guess it can be a type. Business type. I want to say expense type. And of course, we don't have restaurant, weapon, stable, farm, hotel expense types. We have military. And I'm kind of like hard coding all of these as enums and all of that, but you know, I'm probably not going to keep it that way. It'd be nice later on to have that be a lot more like data driven, like pull it from a file or something somewhere. But you know, whatever. This is a tiny project. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it super dumb and simple. Military, infrastructure, water, waste, administration. That's our types from our design doc. So I'm gonna say expense type dot. We will default to military because that's the largest one. I mean, why not? And I'm going to create one more script here, I think. And I'm going to say this will be a nice place called expense attributes, I guess. Might change that name later, but that's what I'll do for now. And inside of here, I'm going to store some information. Can I do a dictionary? Probably can. I don't see why not. And I do need to wrap up soon. It's been an hour already. I can't believe it. It has been an hour. This is insane. We started at 10:30 Central. It's now 11:30 a.m. Central. I just can't believe it. It's been too long. Yep, okay, so dictionary, and I guess a string to an int. And this is expense type to expense amount. Very verbose, isn't it? But it tells you exactly what's going on here. You know what? I think I will do Unity Engine for this one, because I can have this load some stuff. May or may not need it, but yep, might as well. I'm gonna, I guess it's public void awake. Something like that. Expense type, blah, blah, blah. Person class. Yeah. Void awake. Load expense amounts is what I'll call this. Oh, I thought that had autocomplete going on for a minute. By the way, I'm using Sublime only because it's nice for the OBS window capture cooperation. I normally use VS Code, but I need to save this. Yeah, normally VS Code is much friendlier to this type of thing. So I'm going to say add military is 80, of course. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I have these other languages that I use, and I always forget single quotes, double quotes with C#. It is a hard habit to break. I use single quotes a lot with Python, even though you have the option in Python to use either one, but I just can't help it. It just happens. Okay, infrastructure. This was 30, I think. 30 from the design doc. 30. Water is 5. Waste is 3. Administration's 2. Yeah, this would be another example of having a nice data-driven approach where you put this data into a file and then it can just load it into the game, right? And then it would be nice and mod-friendly as well. So you could say that, you know, the player is going to have to pay for, like, ducks every turn if you want to. Okay, so I have what I need. Sort of. And now that we have Unity Engine back in there, I'm going to add in mono behavior as well. Mono behavior, spelt in the UK way, right? That's the English sort of O-U-R as opposed to just O-R, I-O-R. Okay. And I don't remember if this has to implement mono behavior as well to reference that. Hopefully it doesn't. I know you can the other way around. I don't know if this will work. But also I need to know, you know what? I'm just going to make this a collection of strings too, because that'll just be easier. Because I don't care. I'll just make it easier. Although I still want the types. So I'm going to say list string expense types new list string and give me all of these, but I want to add the that's annoying. I want to add the double quotes. Go home, double quotes. There we go. Move all these out of here and up into here. And I think I really could keep the enums. I mean, the enums are kind of cool because like when you have the enums, you can always reference that as like a pick list inside of the Unity editor. It just does that automatically, which is kind of cool, but I'll do a string because why not? There's a way to convert an enum value to a string as well. I've done it before. I don't remember what it is. I don't feel like doing it. So I'm being a little lazy. Admittedly. Expense attribute. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give a little function here. I'm going to say apply attributes. We'll initialize the type. And in fact, I can probably just do a constructor, something like this, and I can do a that, and then say this type is equal to the type, and for apply attributes we are going to do expense attributes dot expense type to expense amount. So I'll really just say this dot amount is equal to expense attributes dot expense type to expense amount. Should all work. Oh, no, it doesn't. Oh, it would probably help if we saved expense attributes, unless there's still a problem in there. Oh, I thought... What in the heck is going on? The type or namespace, mono behavior could not be found. Are you missing an assembly reference? No, I'm not. I'm not missing an assembly reference. Did I do something stupid with the syntax? Someone in the chat has to be like, yes. Yes, you did. Oh, it's the casing. It's the casing. That's what it is. You gotta capitalize the M and capitalize the B. Now there's all kinds of other problems. Expense type is inaccessible due to its protection level. I don't see why. Oh. Oh gosh. Yeah, it doesn't want me to doesn't want me to reference it this way. Okay. I wanna have a way around not having to. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of mono behavior. I don't want to deal with that. Cannot be used as a method or a delegate. Yeah, well that's fine. Here, maybe we can just make a new instance of it. Oh gosh, that's probably a bad idea. That's probably a very bad idea. And now we're back to this. Inaccessible due to its protection level. I'm doing something really dumb. I'm going to kill the stream pretty soon, and then afterward I'm going to think of it, and I'm going to be like, yep, you're pretty dumb. Okay, so this amount, new expense attributes. I don't see why it's having issues. Welcome to programming, folks. What can I say? Oh, yeah. Maybe try making everything static. Maybe that helps. Oh, and it might also help if it's initialized. That might also help. Gosh, this is really annoying because this is like the last thing I want to see working before I cut the stream. I want to see income minus expenses. I know that sounds incredibly boring to anyone, but I want to see that work before I call it and I go to lunch. Because that's generally what I'm going to do on these streams. I'm going to develop for an hour or maybe hour and a half, and then usually go to lunch. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Give me a minute. I'll work through this. Okay, so maybe it might be the constructor. The constructor might be giving me trouble. Well, I think I'm just going to call it there. And what we'll do is we'll plan on returning next week with something working. I don't want to just hang here in silence while my brain malfunctions and I work through this. So I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you so much for watching. And I'm going to go eat lunch. I don't know what everyone else is doing. Hopefully you guys had a fun time listening and watching and whatever else. And, you know, you can go and do whatever it is you're going to do as well. So next week, what am I going to be doing next week? So I'm going to continue on with this after I cut the stream, obviously. So I'm going to, go eat, come back, and then I'm going to work out this error. I'll get this working. We'll have income minus expenses, and the expenses will be static expenses that don't change just yet. And then I still am going to circle back to how do we get multiple people working with the individual businesses so that each business can have multiple individual workers. And I'll just be back again the same time next week. It'll be on Sunday. So going back, by the way, to the Elega Corp website, I'm going to do that now. what I'm going to do is I'm going to be basically running with all of this until next week. So let me put back on Firefox here. There we go. I'm going to come back next week, 10:30 a.m. Central Time. And then on the 28th, I'm going to start doing these a little earlier at 10 Central / 11 a.m. Eastern, and I won't convert for every time zone, but basically I'm going to start moving to the 10 a.m. time slot before the month is over, and then going forward each week. That's basically what I'll be doing. But again, follow the Elega Corp website, elegacorp.com, to see the latest stream schedule, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.